Hi, and welcome back to part 2 of this FabFilter mastering tutorial. In part 1 we concentrated on EQing techniques, and we ended up automating the settings to create quite different EQ curves for the verses and choruses. However, we ran into a problem with the final high frequency boost, as the subjective improvement of the brighter sounding melody part was counterbalanced by an undesirable splashiness in the cymbal hits. We could, in theory, adapt the same approach that we used to differentiate verses and choruses, and draw in automation to only apply the boost between cymbal hits. But as there are a lot of these hits, this would be a time-consuming and labour-intensive task. I'm therefore going to delete the band and try a different approach. I'll start by creating a new track, which I'll name Treble. Route the audio to this new track, and I'll add another instance of Pro Q. Now I'll drag a high-pass filter in from the left and sweep it around. And notice that we get obvious phase cancellation artifacts, so it sounds a bit like a phaser or flanger effect. I'm going to fix this by switching the EQ to one of the linear phase modes, then set the filter frequency up at about 8 kHz. I can now use the fader for that track like a shelving EQ gain. Turning it all the way down gives a flat frequency response, while turning it up smoothly boosts the region above 8 kHz. And with the fader at unity, we have a boost of almost exactly 6 dB. Now I'm going to solo the channel and add an instance of Pro C. And I'm going to compress those high frequencies quite brutally to try to push the cymbal hits down into the body of the sound. In this case, a hard knee setting allows me to be more surgical in catching just the drum hits. And the maximum ratio of infinity to 1 then squashes those hits as hard as possible. I'm going to leave the attack time at its fastest setting, but slow down the release slightly to prevent the tails of the cymbal crashes pumping up too quickly after each hit. Of course, I can't get the compressor to react to cymbal crashes without it also reacting to snare hits with no cymbal crash. But so long as the gain ducks for every crash, this probably won't matter. If I turn off solo again, I can now use the channel fader to mix a little of this compressed high frequency track in under the main signal. And I can now find a much better compromise between the brilliance of the melody line and the splashiness of the cymbal. This technique results in a form of frequency-specific upward compression, which can be much more subtle and transparent than traditional multi-band compressors, which split the signal into separate bands using a crossover. I'm going to use the same technique to address a different issue. I've become aware that the bass part appears to fluctuate in level slightly during the choruses, and that in certain places it seems to be pushed a little too far back behind the other parts. I'll therefore create another track, this time called Low Mid, route my audio down it in parallel again, and load another Pro Q. I'll set this to one of the linear phase modes again, but this time create both a high-pass filter, which I'll set to about 70 Hz, and also a low-pass filter, which I'll try at about 500 Hz. And we've now bracketed the frequency region, which I think is most important to the bass guitar. So let's add another Pro C and squash it hard with compression again. But this time I'm not trying to catch a specific part, so the default soft knee is fine, and I'll go with a lower ratio than I used for the treble track. If I solo the channel, I hear a tiny hint of distortion from the fast release time, so I'll slow it down a bit to smooth this out. And I also hear a bit of a slapping effect from the kick on some hits, so I'll increase the attack time as well to dial those out. Now I'll slide open the expert panel and switch the stereo mode to mid-side. We now have an extra pan ring around the output level knob, which we can use to adjust the balance between the mono mid components and the stereo pan side element. We can clearly hear that the bass part is mixed firmly in the middle, so I'm going to leave the pan knob all the way to the left so that we're only adding to the middle of the mix. And I'll also do the same for the side chain pan ring, so the mid-channel's compression is keyed only by those same centrally panned elements. Now I can use the fader for the low-mid track to control how much compression is applied to the low-mid region. And mixing this in subtly at about -8 dB seems to add a useful extra solidity to the bass part without overly muddying the mix. Our audio is now spread out across 3 different tracks, so I'm going to bus them all to a subgroup for overall processing. The easiest way to do this in Reaper is to simply drag them onto another track to create a folder. It might be tempting to try some overall compression at this point, as that's what usually happens during mastering. However, in this case, I don't think it needs it. The parts are already well glued together, and the dynamic range is not excessive. Indeed, I think we might be able to use even more dynamics. So I'm instead going to load up an instance of Pro G and switch it to upward mode. A little goes a long way with upward expansion, especially when processing full mixes. So I'm going to start by double-clicking the range knob and typing in 3 dB as my maximum expansion. And I'll also dial the ratio down low to about 1.15 to 1. I want to add some snappy attack to the drums, so I'll set the attack time right down to 0. Then turn down the threshold to start catching the peaks. I'm afraid it might be catching a bit too much of the kick drum, however, so let's slide open the Advanced tab and filter some low sub-bass out of the sidechain. While I'm here, I'm also going to switch to mid-side mode and set the sidechain balance rings in opposite directions. The mid expansion is now being keyed just by the centrally panned mid elements, while the side expansion is keyed from the stereo side element, which will exaggerate the difference in stereo width between the verse and chorus sections. Let's turn the side channel gain up a bit to drive the expander a bit harder for just the side signals. Time for a reality check now, so let's solo the bypass track to make sure our processing has actually made a real improvement. Obviously, in reality, I constantly checked my processing against this track throughout the process, and made many small tweaks and refinements before arriving at these precise settings. But that took a lot longer than the running time of this video, so I've had to streamline the process for the sake of this tutorial. Anyway, I'm happy with the sound now, so I'll return to the Pro L limiter plug which I loaded at the start, switch the meter scale to K12 instead of K20, and raise the gain till I reach my new target levels. And I can do this quite easily with only 2 or 3 dB of gain reduction on the loudest peaks in the choruses. Let's pick one of the rock type presets. And as I'm planning to render a 16-bit file ready to burn onto CD, I will also enable 16-bit dither noise. That's all I've got time for in this video. Thanks for watching.